So I hope that it works now. I welcome today for this lecture in Architectural Theory 2, Riccardo Villa, who is actually coming from Vienna, where he's assistant researcher at the Department for Architectural Theory and Philosophy of Technics at the Vienna University of Technology, in German, the TU Wien. And he's working as a member of the Milan-based architectural research collective Gizmo. He holds a master's degree in architecture from the Polytechnic University of Milan and worked as architect and researcher between Milan, Brussels, and Vienna, contributing to several exhibitions, magazines, books, and lectures. His recent interests revolve around architecture in its production under a spectrum of investigation that spans from aesthetics and semiotics to biopolitics. I welcome you, Riccardo, for today's lecture entitled Modernity at the Mirror. Thank you for coming.
Thanks, Bettina, for the introduction. And thanks to the department for inviting me here today. It's my first time in Innsbruck. I'm very happy to be here. The title of my lecture today is, nevertheless, is indeed Modernity at the Mirror, and this was the topic I wanted to discuss today when I was invited to this lecture. Then, just as a disclaimer, around the end of November, I received, let's say, a call from Davide and Giacomo asking if I could start from Architecture and Revolution of Le Corbusier, from there make a bridge to Falling Water from Frank Lloyd Wright. So I accepted this very interesting challenge, and I will try to fit, nevertheless, the topic I wanted to discuss in this bridge that I'm supposed to create. So let's start straight away from this. So Architecture Revolution is the ending chapter of Vers une Architektur, Towards an Architecture, the famous book by Le Corbusier, published in 1923. And as you see immediately from here, it's not, so it's a book, of course, about architecture, but and this is typical of the book. So the image that you see here is not the one of an architecture, it's one rather pertaining to engineering. So it's a turbine that has been mounted. And this is in all the chapters of the book. You have turbines, you have machines, you have industries, you have viaducts, so all works of engineering. So there's already a kind of interesting tension between the subject of the book, which is architecture, and what is presented, so engineering. And is a tension which is somehow indicated through this idea of revolution, which is again the last chapter, and I will just read the last quote of this chapter, written by Le Corbusier, which is: "Society is filled with a violent desire for something which it might obtain or might not. Everything lies in that. Everything depends on the effort made and the attention paid to these alarming symptoms. Architecture or revolution? Revolution can be avoided." So, what is revolution here? Revolution is a kind of ambiguous term by definition, but in this case also, because on one hand we have the Industrial Revolution, the one represented by the machine, and on another hand we have revolution as an idea of a catastrophe, so of this violent desire that if it's not satisfied, it will lead to a revolution, so to a catastrophe. So the problem that Le Corbusier is trying to state here is that our architecture, so the architecture of the time, which is still concerned about style, so about certain traditional formalism, is not up to the pace, is not up to date to the Industrial Revolution, so the means of production of the society itself. And so this alignment between the means of production, so the modern means of production, and a traditional architecture and a traditional environment in which the man lives is something potentially dangerous and leading to a catastrophe. Therefore, a manifesto, a claim, a hope for an adaptation of architecture and of the environment, of the social environment, also to this new means of production. And but this is, let's say, the most common way to look at the claim by Le Corbusier. But I would like already to foreground another concept which is contained in Revolution. Here you see on the left side you see the sketch for the cover of the book itself, which at some point Le Corbusier himself thought of calling Architecture or Revolution. And then the actual cover of the book with the actual title, which is Vers une Architektur, toward an architecture. And there is somehow a concept of time which is embodied both in the idea of revolution and both in the final title which is chosen, so the one of Vers une Architektur, a concept of time meaning that, so which is also embodied in the picture chosen for the main cover, which is a steamship, so a mechanized ship. But you see, it's not just the picture of a mechanized ship; is the picture of a bridge, which is a perspective, and so dissolves towards a vanishing point. And so, toward, I think, is an important word in order to grasp this concept. So, something which is about to come, is yet to come, is not there yet. But still needs to be reached, needs to be still embodied, but is still now vanishing and not being grasped. And in these terms, I think we can also understand, in a way, the title of the magazine of the magazine that L'Esprit Nouveau that Corbusier founds in 1920 with Amédée aux Enfants, a cubist painter, and Paul Dermet, a poet of the avant-garde, from which most of the essays of Toward an Architecture come from. Toward an Architecture, in a way, is a collection of essays written by Le Corbusier on this magazine. And just as a footnote, but I think it's interesting to highlight it, is that here Le Corbusier, from the very first number, appears with two names. So on one hand, on the left column, you see he writes an article under his name of Charles-Édouard Jeanneret, which is his anagraphical name. And on the right side, where he writes about architecture, he writes signing himself as Le Corbusier. So Le Corbusier, of course, is an invented name, is a nickname that he takes from one of his ancestors, which was called Corbusier, but he added Le on top, so he is the Corbusier, so in order to remark his identity, and also to use a name that it's much more communicable, so it's much more easy to remember, not only because it's shorter, so it's not Jean-Edouard Jeanneret, but it's also, you can also shorten it in an acronym, so LC, or just use it as Corbu. And it's not a magazine just of architecture, you see, but of aesthetics. It's a magazine, it's an international magazine of aesthetics. So, and it includes painting, sculpture, literature, and in the end, all the aesthetics of the modern life. So, why aesthetics, which is not style? Because aesthetics is all the fields in which the spirit, so something invisible again, something vanishing, can be grasped, can be seen. So can be grasped and must be realized. So the newness here is not in the style again, but in something more transcendent and transparent, not visible to the eye, if not in a reflection. New spirit, esprit nouveau. And it is the key that I want to put forward today is exactly the one of transparency, of reflection, of speculation, and spectrality. And what better example, of course, to talk and to start to talk about transparency in relation to modern architecture than this. So the Crystal Palace, you already saw it, I think, many times in the previous lecture. Somehow it's a key building for the history of modern architecture. And it's not only one of the first buildings made of a modular and industrially produced system of steel and glass, so in a way you could see it as a gigantic curtain wall ante litteram, but it is also a true cathedral of this modern spirit, of this esprit nouveau, not only because it has the plan of a basilica, so somehow something spiritual, but because of the, let's say, unholy ritual that of adoration of the goods that is there celebrated. So as you see nicely with, I think, Davide's lecture, the one, the Phantasmagoria of Walter Benjamin. And it's so interesting that many intellectuals of the time visited and are fascinated with it in a good or a bad manner. So not only Walter Benjamin, but also Alexandre Dumas writes about it, Emily Bront, Fyodor Dostoevsky, William Makepeace Thackeray, John Ruskin, and even Marx himself writes a phrase about it. He says in a review, he says, it is the pantheon of the modern Rome where the bourgeois exhibited the gods it has made for itself. So it's a kind of a temple of consumption. And to move forward with this image of the temple, we move from, let's say, a temple of consumption to a temple of production. Here is the design of Peter Behrens for the AEG turbine factory in 1909. A turbine hall that has indeed the rigor somehow of a Greek temple with a pediment, the pediment where let's say the name turbine fabric and the logo of AEG stands, and a regular pace of columns and made of steel. So a temple of work and industrial production where also other kind of modern rituals are celebrated, of the modern rituals of this new spirit. And you see already here how transparency also plays a key role. So this building does not just have simply windows. The wall covers the whole surface in between the columns and is also put forward not just metaphorically, but literally in the main facade of the building as a big glass frame. And a similar lesson is adopted by two disciples of Behrens, Walter Gropius and Adolf Meyer, in 1911, design again a factory for the German shoemaker Fagus. This you see it on the left. And here you see how the scheme of Behrens is inverted. So the corners, which are usually the parts of the building that must be more solid, are here completely revealed to the looker by the stretching of what we can call again a curtain wall. So it's completely the corners are completely exposed through glass. And this solution is even more visible in the model factory designed and built in 1914 for the exhibition of the Deutscher Werkbund in Cologne, that you see instead on the right. And here the corners are not just revealed, but the stairs of the corner are put into display. So they're really exposed through these glass cages that then wrap around the building also on the back. So again, with this transparent curtain wall that is associated with a place of production. And in the same year and in the same exhibition of the Werkbund of Cologne, another interesting example, maybe the most crucial example concerning glass is the pavilion for the glass industry designed by Bruno Taut, a German architect. A pavilion that has no other scope than to celebrate glass itself. So the glass is displayed through glass itself in a kind of tautology without any signification. And as you see, it's made of a concrete skeleton filled with colored glass. And unfortunately, the picture of the time were in black and white, so you cannot see the color. And from the walls to the cupola that covers it like a precious stone, like a jewel. On the frieze, you see inscribed some words. It's a set of lyrics dedicated to glass that are penned by the true inspirer of this architecture, which is the German writer of fantastic literature, Paul Scherbart. Paul Scherbart, that in the same year, in 1914, Paul Scherbart, which is in contact with Bruno Taut, publishes this essay, this volume, which is called Glass Architektur, so a glass architecture, an essay in which he described and prophesied the advent of a new culture, which he calls of a glass culture. Here you see the incipit, so the beginning of the first chapter of the book. And in this first chapter, he criticizes the architecture of the time as one of closed room. And he says, since the culture is a product of the environment we live in, and therefore of the architecture where this environment is hosted, he hopes for a transformation of architecture into something made completely of glass so that also our culture can raise to a higher level. And it's like this new high culture, this culture of glass, can finally be realized. Sherbard's book is so influential for Taut that in 1919 the German architect elaborates this idea, the one of an alpine architecture, which is an utopian vision in which Taut covers the landscape of the Alps, the alpine landscape, with this crystal architecture, as if the crust of Earth was to be turned from opaque rocks to completely crystal glass. And like most of utopian projects, it comes somehow as a response to an unrest. And namely here, it's 1919. It's the end of World War I, so Germany is defeated. There's a great depression. There's somehow a great will to escape this depression. And here is somehow escaped in these purely utopian terms. But the enthusiasm for such an utopia is shared not just by Taut, but is shared by him with other architects' colleagues. So, to name a few, Finsterlin, Hablik, Sharon, Max Taut, Vasily, and Hans Luckert, with which Taut starts exchanging letter about this idea of crystal and of glass, and in what will be then called the glass chain or the Gläserne Kette, or also utopian correspondence. An epistolary chain where the chain is, of course, the one of the exchange of letter, but also symbolizes an attempt to free, again, architecture from its traditional chains. Nevertheless, this group, even if it celebrates the idea of a crystal architecture, so of glass at the beginning, will soon abandon in the reality of their project the idea of glass as a material construction of a new culture, and this will be kept more as a metaphor. Someone that instead is very interested in glass, not just as a metaphor, but is in materiality of building environment, is again Walter Benjamin, which is a reader of Sherbard, and is also impressed with his proposal. You see here, in 1921, he already states, "To live in a glass house is a revolutionary virtue par excellence." Why is it so? Because glass, and you see later, objects made of glass have no aura, so they are not subjected to this halo or to this something ineffable which comes from, let's say, a traditional setup, so let's say a religious setup, and they are the enemy of possession. So they are somehow counter the capitalist accumulation of goods. So glass is able to make tabula rasa of the traditional bourgeois values and allow for the coming of a new revolutionary era. In that sense, we can say that glass, in this view, lets somehow things be what they are. It frees them from any bias, let's say, given by tradition or again by experience. As you see, this is an essay contained in experience and poverty. And I think the most interesting translation of Benjamin's view and of Benjamin's fascination over glass is not really Taut, but Mies van der Rohe. Here you see the glass skyscraper of 1922, which I will not indulge in explaining how is it important, the glass surface here, because again, David already, I think, explained it very well. But just to spend a few words here, I think it's important what Mies says about glass. He says that glass alone permits the skeleton structure and an unambiguous constructive appearance, so somehow a true constructive appearance. And again, always Mies says that concrete, steel, and glass, but most of all glass, are genuine building elements and the instruments of a new building art, because they permit a measure of freedom in spatial composition that we are not supposed to relinquish anymore. Only now, he says, we can articulate space freely, open it up, and connect it to the landscape. Now it becomes clear again what a wall is, what an opening is, what is floor, and what is ceiling. So glass somehow allows us to show the essence of things, the essence of these elements, and to open our architecture to the environment, to the landscape. And I think in these terms is interesting to look at Mies' first domestic projects. So in terms of opening, especially opening landscape, a revelation of the essence of architectural elements. This is the brick country house, a project he sketched in 1923. And this is the plan, of course. And thanks to glass here, the brick wall is freed from its function of a mere container. It can stand here, you see the walls, they can stand as wall in themselves. It can show in itself in its essence. So it's not anymore linked to the function of container of the house. This doesn't mean, nevertheless, that the building has no boundary or definition. The wall is freed from this task, which is now taken over instead by this thin line that you see surrounding it, which is the plinth of the building, which is an important element always in Mies. So the plinth, the use of the plinth and the glass allow the wall to stand on the plan as a thing in itself and to reveal itself in its essence. So space is not something contained anymore, but it's something articulated, which is a bit different. Another aspect of this, and this opening, especially the opening to the landscape, and again, the revealing of the elements, Villa Tugendhat, Brno in 1927-1930. Here you see the glass screens are not just windows, again, but they are literally glass walls, the glass screens, and they go from floor to ceiling. Not only they go from floor to ceiling, so they connect, again, the living room with the landscape. Not only they go from floor to ceiling, but they also disappear at will in the wall below themselves. So they can open up completely the interior space to the landscape, and the definition is left only to the floor and the ceiling. And they can open it up, and they can somehow display this also these interior elements, especially you see here the cross-shaped column. They are not here just they're not just here designed as a functional element of support, but are really exposed as a beautiful element. So they are covered in chrome. And again, this is the more interior of the living room, where you see the element, how the wall turns then not just in a functional wall, but it is a screen made of beautiful marble. Again, next to these distinguished columns. And this is something that, again, it's even more improved in the Barcelona pavilion, where this is almost brought to the extreme. You see the perimeter, so the definition of the building is left to this plinth, accessible by stairs, on top of which stands this interplay of cross-shaped columns, marble walls, and glass screens. And also the roof is somehow liberated from being just a container, and can somehow play freely and stand as an element in itself. And now here I would just go fast forward in the career of Mies. Here we are reading the so-called American years. So this is the Farnsworth House in Plano, Illinois, from 1945 to 1951. That's one of the most iconic and well-known project of Mies, and which, even if realized after Johnson's so-called glass house, I would say Farnsworth art is in fact the modern glass house par excellence. So it embodies this myth. The perimeter here is not defined by plinths, but it's standing on raised platform, and the envelope here of the house is fully made of glass. So there's no more opaque walls. You see it here in this picture during let's say a flood of the site. So which is interesting. I always like this picture because somehow it reveals this change from plinth to platforms. But you see that the domestic space, so the space which you suppose traditionally, again, to hold secrets and where one would leave traces, so where we leave his experience, is here completely freed from this, and it's completely, if not for the curtains, it's completely penetrable to an external gaze, and vice versa. So, and in continuing to this idea of glass and transparency as a material way to show the essence of things, which is, I think, common. It's a common theme in Mies and Benjamin. I think this is also taken as a metaphor by this writing of Valéry, which I find interesting. It's in 1903, coming from a book called An Evening with Monsieur Test, and it's a part where he describes a glassman. He says, "My vision is so clear, my perception so pure, my knowledge so awkwardly complete, my representative power so unfettered and precise, and my understanding so perfect that I can enter myself from the extremities of the earth and reach my silent word. And rising from the formless thing that is the object of the search, I follow myself along known fibers and ordered centers. I answer myself. I reflect and resonate myself. I tremble before the infinity of mirrors. I am made of glass." So you see here, transparency is a device of a gaze that claims to be objective, to look at things in their essence, not only to look at things in their essence, but to look at the self in its essence, so the impossible thing by definition, to look at things in their truthfulness, so to look beyond the superficial and misleading appearance of things. And this is, of course, as an outcome already also in science. First, here you see on the left the first X-ray prints, so the first X-ray machines that are able to look at the inner structure of the body, so the body is an opaque object that becomes transparent, but also the invention of psychoanalysis. So Freud, on the interpretation of dreams, is his text that comes out in 1899, so at the end of the 19th century. So not only bodies become transparent, but also minds, also the self. So there's an interest and an ambition in the conquest of the true thing in itself, not only the true things in itself, but also of the irrational, a conquest over the irrational in order to rationalize and correct it, to rationalize and correct the rational, the mad, the sick. Inspection and correction, these two aspects, seeing inside things, so inspection, and make them right. And this is not something new, it has a long history that here we don't have time to recall fully. I will just mention this architectural example of which is concerned with inspection and correction as two main features. This, as you see, is the panopticon or the inspection house presented by Jeremy Bentham in around 1786, so late 18th century, on the drawings made by his brother Samuel Bentham. And transparency, opacity here play a key role in this architecture, which is also a kind of a machine. So all the cells of the detainees, which you see are on the outer perimeter, are completely visible to the central eye, which is in return invisible to them. So the prisoner here is always feeling observed, but doesn't know really if he is. So in the doubt, he behaves. So that's the functioning, said in simple words about the thing. And it is striking here, so how general the functioning of this architecture is. So it not only can apply to several functions linked to this inspection, you see named here in this pamphlet, so not only prisons, but also houses of industry, workhouses, poorhouses, manufactories, schools, etc. But also anyone, it doesn't matter who is the one inspecting. So it can be a guard, it can be a teacher, it can be a scientist. So it's a device working independently by who's looking. It presupposes somehow already a scientific subjectivity independent from personal features, so for personal qualification. It's a form who's working as a general validity, we could say. And this, to move from architecture to the urban scale, this general functioning and an objective gaze, is also applied to the city here in the case of the expansion project of expansion plan of Barcelona that you might know. It's 1860. After that, the government of Madrid allows Barcelona to expand over its old city wall, so that you see in dark black at the lower bottom of the plan. So after the government of Madrid allows for the expansion finally of Barcelona, then the question is how to make it so that it's a planned expansion, that it's an ordered one, and therefore that will ensure social order and also health conditions. So again, inspection and correction. And this is, the project is made by Ildefonso Cerdà, which is a civil engineer, and is realized, of course, if you know Barcelona today, is for the most part realized. And not only is realized, but it's also published. So the theory behind it, Cerdà published it in the volume General Theory of Urbanization, where he himself invents this term. Urbanization is invented basically by Serdar because of his unhappiness, we'd say, with the term city. A city for him was still alluding to or pointing to a dimension which is not the one of the city as a concrete fact. It was not the city. It was already was still linked to the idea of civil and also of values or something more immaterial. And what he's concerned with is the objectivity or the hard fact of the city. So he wants to have an objective term to render this objective dimension of the city. So, and the urbanization as a concrete fact or as a matter of fact is also the subtitle of the general theory of urbanization. And this objectivity, so you can already see somehow here, the formal feature of this urbanization are not dictated by any style or formalism, so it's not anymore a kind of a Baroque drawing, but by the objective necessities that Serdar himself points out. So streets are large enough to allow for the circulation of air and traffic, and flows, so of these flows of air traffic and population, for example, play an important role. But how to make a picture of this flow, so something which is again ephemeral, which is like the spirit is vanishing, so it's not something static. How to grasp it in a design. So this is contained in the second volume of the general theory of urbanization, which is hardly published, is almost never published. Because why is it not published? Because it's 500 pages of just statistics. So it's this table for 500 pages. And this is the real source of the objectivity of Serdar's plan, which does not, again, rely on its design, but in these hundreds of pages collecting statistics. And statistic emerges in the same period, more or less in roughly the same period of this plan, as a science of the state. That's where the title statistics come from, as a way to operate and control on a scale that is so vast that it's hard to be framed through the usual means. So it needs to be synthesized through numbers. And Serdar himself describes statistics as an inexhaustible source of solid, irresistible reasons that can turn into mathematical form and figures a series of abstract problems. So in a way to exclude the interference of imagination. So imagination and form as a formalist thing is meant to be excluded. Results of statistics are daughters of the irreproachable logic of numbers. And so there is this pointing at statistics as something very solid and objective. But in order to be effective, this is also an interesting part which is hardly mentioned, is the annex to this volume, which is an annex which concerns statistics over the working class of Barcelona. Because he says, in order to be effective, in order to have a good plan, the statistic research must comprehend the population in all its aspects. So he adds himself a statistic that he does himself on the working class of Barcelona, because he says this class must be represented in order to give a proper housing, a proper dwelling to this very important class that rises in this period. So again, here a kind of architecture and to avoid revolution claim here, urbanization to avoid revolution, and the attention of working class is of course not something new, or especially in the, let's say, the comparison between city and factory after the Industrial Revolution. Here you see is already a theme already somehow treated in a way by Ledoux in the Royal Salt Works, so in the Céline of Arquet-Senan, 1804, where a city, so a plan of a city, where at the center is not anymore, nor let's say the civic center or the church, but is the house of the director of the salt works. So is the, let's say, the head of this cycle of production. And of course, here I'm going very quick, but just to mention this important example, is a theme also at the center of Tony Garnier's Cité Industrielle, 1897, where a city that tries to respond, so how can a city be built in a time of industry? So how can we give housing to the workers and to all this population that works in the industry, and how can we give also a place of the industry in the city? And it's a theme, to come back to to our known authors, is a theme also at the center somehow of the reflection of the functional city debated in the International Congresses of Modern Architecture. These congresses in which Le Corbusier takes part, by which he is influenced, but he also influenced as well. So here on the left side, you see, let's say, a rendering of the Ville Contemporaine for 3 million of inhabitants in 1922, where this skyscraper that you see from, I think, from the housing district are the skyscraper that are supposed to host the businessmen that work in the city. So again, another kind, not a more, let's say, the working class, so to say, but another kind of work, of a more immaterial production. And this centrality you see also in the later change, let's say, the later version of this proposal, so the Ville Radieuse in 1924, where at the top, again, you see the skyscraper, and exactly in the middle of the plan, the housing for this businessman, let's say. And differently from Cerda, here the form is not just the results of statistics and number. So Le Corbusier actually designs different forms that the city is supposed to take. Architecture somehow is affirmed as something that goes beyond the mere engineering and statistics, and then can still decide the form of the city. And this, in spite of the fact that Le Corbusier somehow promotes his city as, for example, a city of 3 million or 6 million, so somehow he still points to this dimension of number, of concrete number, which is more of a slogan, as in a very, I would say, German way. One of his colleagues points out, Hilberseimer, in the German architect Hilberseimer, points out that if you really count the spaces of the city, it doesn't add up nor to 3 million nor to 6 million. So somehow the numbers don't come. And Hilberseimer, which gives a different answer to the problem, to this problem of the city, and in 1924 he responds to Le Corbusier's Ville Radieuse with a project for a Hochhausstadt, so a high-rise city, or literally a city of high houses. And like Cerda, he also places his investigation beyond the idea of what is simply called city. So in this case, it's a Hochhausstadt. And like Cerda, again, his project is meant to constitute a sort of general theory of urbanization, which is published instead in 1927 with the title of Großstadtarchitektur, so the architecture of the big city. And what is a Großstadt, or as it's been translated, a metropolis? It's an intersection of, so here you see the very beginning of the book. It's an intersection of the flow of human activity, economics, and spirit. So spirit comes again, and of flows, of course. It's something where city and state somehow coincide, but not in a way like the city-state or the polis, because metropolis are rather the energy centers of both states and the work these states produce. So on a scale of, there is an interrelation on the scale of production, on the level of production between city and state. So, and then the metropolis is not just an enlargement of a city, it's not just a city which is scaled up. He says that a city becomes a metropolis only through the introduction of certain economic phenomena, primarily through the concentration of capital, people, and the industrial exploitation of both. So there is a connection between urbanization and production, again, between city, let's say, and factory. And here is not realized in a composition of different forms, but in finding the most concise, necessary, and general forms that constitute the fundamental elements of the metropolis and of its laws. So this architectural rendering, we could see it almost as a diagram of three elementary functions, so habitation, production, and flows. There is a mathematical clarity of distinguishing all the fundamental elements and of making them visible. So as Paul Klee would say of theory as sichtbar machen. And starting from habitation, so from the one on the top, let's say, from these blocks at the tops, it's interesting how in the text so this is the project of the Hochhausstadt, but here I'm referring, of course, to Großstadtarchitektur, how in the text Hilberseimer always compares or tries to realize, let's say, habitation in the form of a hotel. So like in the Glass House by Benjamin, where a place where no one can leave trace, so when you cannot accumulate experience, you cannot accumulate goods, where nothing sticks, where there's like this continuous flow. Also here, this dimension is somehow of continuous change of movement is somehow addressed. And then, before that, you see, to move to the production part, so the lower part behind these flows, you see, is the part of the offices and of the production. And here is striking how this rendering is similar to a project by a friend of Hilbesheimer, again, Mies van der Rohe, which in 1923 designs this concrete office building project, which is not just a project, but is a building which is also a kind of a manifesto. It's published in the first number of G, with this text. So with this, this is not the full text, but this is the start. So it says, we reject any aesthetic speculation, any doctrine, and any formalism. Building art is the will of the epoch turned into space, alive, changing, new. Not the yesterday, not the tomorrow. Only the today is formable. Only this building create form out of the nature of the task with the means of our time. That is our work. So again, a refusal of formalism, so any kind of aesthetic which is self-referred, and building is the art of materializing, so or turning into space the will of the epoch. And about this building in particular, it says the office building is a building of work, organization, clarity, economy. So this idea that the flows and these things at work must be somehow clarified through our architecture, made visible again in their essence. And to come back to Hilbesheimer, this is a development project for Berlin, where you see again here it's not anymore, let's say, offices, but workshops at the base. And so this idea of Hilbesheimer is like, it's like in the factory where the processes are clearly organized and visible. So he says the same should be done by the city. So the city should also be shaped out of this clarity, so not left to, let's say, an undesigned process. So the task of the architect is to make visible these processes of production, of which the metropolis, again, is the center of. And what he says at the end, he says, not at the end of the city, so the metropolis is not at the end of the city, but an end to the city that does not know its own laws. So the idea, again, is to materialize this somehow in hidden laws of the metropolis. So the architect is not anymore concerned, this is always the same project, the architect is not anymore concerned with production of objects, but his task is rather to organize and design the production cycle. And by designing it in the form of architecture, it makes, again, this transparent, this invisible cycle visible. And this is something which, interestingly, I think it's also mirrored in a way in the work by Hugh Ferris that Hilbesheimer knows and quotes in his book. Hugh Ferris, whose works, the form in his works is not, again, invented by a creative genius or by some kind of formalist, but is literally carved out from a kind of sheer necessity. So from the necessity of the zoning law of New York that imposes every building to have a setback for the quality of living, so for air quality of the city, and allows it only at the very core, so only after a certain setback, to speculate until infinity. And this is what you see here in an architecture, which, so in a rendering, which is, again, almost a diagram. So form here, and in Hilbesheimer, and I would say also here, is what, so form, what we see, is not something, again, drawn by formalists, but is the result of a process of calculation that itself produces an image. So the calculation produces an image. And here to go, to make a jump, let's say, in the contemporary, this is one of the themes that I would say is addressed by this rendering, because this project, which is The City of the Captive Globe by Rem Koolhaas, or OMA, so the Office for Metropolitan Architecture, so an interesting between architecture and metropolis, 1972. And one of the ways to read this project, I think, is exactly this. So if we all build, if all that we build and all that we see, so all the forms that we build, so all the forms that populate our world are dictated by calculation, then word itself becomes an artificial construct, becomes something which can be fitted into a grid. So word is an image that we can understand only through this grid and by the measure of this calculation. And if the word becomes this artificial construct, it means therefore that there is no natural earth on which to ground it. And this, I think, is one of, again, of the way to read this other project, which is the Non-Stop City by Archizoom Associati. So again, reality is not reality as we find it, but is the one produced by the processes that we ourselves design. And in this case, there's no outside to this system. This is a bit the proposition of Archizoom, I think. And I would like to remark that the full title of this project is No Stop City, Residential Parking. So again, this kind of tension between two apparently distant dimensions. But the last title is Climatic Universal System. So this project is by 1970. So, but climate, so something, again, which is was escaping any predictability, something vanishing, any rationalization, becomes here systematized somehow and controlled. There's this kind of paradox and ambition. This, of course, is a kind of critical project. So. This idea of climatic control is something obsessing, I would say, architecture in the second half of the 20th century. Here you see the Montreal Biosphere by Richard Buckminster Fuller as a pavilion, an American pavilion for the international exhibition. And so the aim is almost like designing or enclosing through design what is transparent par excellence, the environment. And here the enclosure is presented almost as a perfect system shaped like the Earth itself, so and like a perfect sphere itself. And this we can also see, I would say, as a heritage of the Crystal Palace that we were seeing at the beginning. So this idea of the greenhouse that can contain the word, with the difference that it's not anymore a containment of all the words in the form of goods, so of the let's say of the circularity of consumption. But here the topic, so what is the invisible contained is the environment. And another answer to this creation of an artificial environment, I think it's the one given by the metabolist. Here you see Kisho Kurokawa, Clusters in the Air, 1960, 1962. It is a different approach. Here it's, so the ground of the city is somehow almost ignored, and on top of the ground of the city, there are built these almost tree structure where the primary structure, so the log, is the one that is supposed to remain, and the secondary one, which are the branches that connect to it, can vary depending on the needs. And it creates an environment, its aim is to create an environment where natural and artificial are not anymore opposed, but are understood somehow at once. So reading from the Metabolist Manifesto, they say, we use the term metabolism because for us, design and technology are nothing but extensions of man's vital power. So again, man and machine go together, man, machine, and nature. And another metabolist project, let's say Kiyonori Kikutake, Ocean City, 1962. Here, even more, the paradox of grounding a city on what is not ground par excellence, so on water. So creating a human environment where it's, by definition, impossible to live. And this interest for a mechanized artificial environment is something well investigated by the architectural historian and critic Rainer Banham in 1969 with his book of The Architecture of the Well-Tempered Environment, which follows somehow Siegfried Gideon's book Mechanization Takes Command, but tries to overcome, let's say, this exposing of a technological invention as a myth. The aim of Banham is instead, in his word, is to fill what he considers a void in architecture history and teaching, that is mechanical environment controls and the way they modified the structure of architecture. Just to phrase it in a quote from the book, he says, ask a historian of modern architecture who invented the pilotis, and he can tell you. Ask him who invented the equally consequential revolving door, and he cannot. And so this interest to the mechanization, and also in a way to this obsession of Banham with American architecture, so with the architecture of the United States, which finds an immediate response in the fact that a great part of this book is dedicated to the American architect par excellence, I would say, Frank Lloyd Wright. So this is the first building Banham treats in the book, the Larkin Company Administration Building in Buffalo, 1901, 1902, so the very beginning of the century, which is an office building very different from the one we were seeing before. So it's not anymore the glass skyscraper or this concrete and glass box. Its essence is opaque to the urban environment. This is typical of the, let's say, urban project of Mies, which always somehow are very, we could say, introverted towards the densification and the let's say the poisonous gases of the city, as he calls them. Its essence, I was saying, is to be found rather on the inside. And here you see the picture of the inside of the building, where office desks are placed in this large central void and on the surrounding balconies. And light here, so the environment here, starting from light, is somehow isolated from let's say, it's not anymore something that you see out of the window as a part of the picture you see out of the windows, but it's isolated through this rooftop skylight. So so it somehow comes down as light in its essence, but not just light, also air. This is one of the first air conditioning buildings in the country. And here you see the scheme of the air conditioning presented by Banham of the building, where you see that these huge towers on the corners are not just like formal inventions, but they are actually something serving the conditioning of the building itself. And they are used as air ventilation intakes, where the air is taken down to the basement, cleaned, and then emitted, also inserted in the building. So here, machine and architecture are not in competition against each other. The machine is not a gadget that comes on top of architecture, but they somehow come together organically. So that's also one of the meanings of the Wright's organic architecture. So there's no solution of continuity. It's not really an organicism in form. Again, it's not a formalist organicism, but it's a organic coming together of man, machine, nature again. And this is something which is even more evident, I would say, in a later project, 1936, the Johnson Administration Building, by the words of Wright, hermetically sealed and air conditioned. So again, this idea of sealing. And here you see the light doesn't even come from the sun. It's a glass tubing lit space. It's glass tubes that light this space. So glass here is not seen. It's not anymore used to see something else or to refer to something else, but it's itself a generator of light. Sorry. And just to make a footnote, I think it's interesting how this project of office somehow preludes to the non-stop city by Archizoom. This is another rendering, and a hermetically sealed climate of this universal climatic system, where here again the urban dimension is not only refused, but it's totally denied. There's no outside again to this architecture. But the same attention, so to come back to Wright, the same attention to environment and to its organic collaboration with machines is also given in its residential project. So again, we shift from production to dwelling. Here you see the Robbie house of 1908, 1910. That doesn't look at all like modern houses that we saw in the European counterparts, so like the ones of the Weissenhof. Again, as a footnote, it's interesting. This is somehow the reason why in the first, in international style by Hitchcock and Johnson, Wright somehow is excluded because it doesn't represent, so it doesn't show itself as an aesthetics. It will be then re-included in the exhibition Modern Architecture by suggestion of Mumford, but somehow it doesn't at a face value we could say it doesn't embody this character of modernity. Hitchcock and Johnson title, let's say, Wright as an architect of the 19th, one of the best architects of the 19th century, so not of the 20th. Yet, more than any formal slogan, let's say, The form of this house is conceived to harmonize natural and mechanized elements, so man and machine. You see it here, the scheme of how the house works. So the air intake in summer and winter, and how the house itself is a technological device. So technology here is not a gadget, not something on top, but the house somehow works organically as a machine and with the machine. In the words of Banan, the one of Wright is an architecture in which environmental technology was not called in as a desperate remedy, nor had it dictated the forms of the structure, but it was finally and naturally subsumed in a normal working method of the architects and contributed to its freedom of design. And I would say, in this regards, how striking it is, this quote by Gideon concerning Le Corbusier could apply perhaps even more to the work of Wright. So the houses of Le Corbusier then find themselves neither by space nor by forms. The air passes right through them. The air is the constitutive factor. So this, again, these attentions to flows and to something that then moves and cannot be seen. And this somehow also to point to a kind of common way of conceiving architecture by these Greek masters. So of course in their difference. And this embodiment or this hosting of flows in architecture is, I think it's even more visible in this example that I think you all know, Kaufman House, so 1934-37, built in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, not so far from Pittsburgh, which we all know as falling water. So here the compenetration between flows and architecture becomes the distinctive mark of the house. Just a note, Edgar Kaufman, so the client of the house, wanted initially to have it built in front of the waterfall, so he wanted to see the waterfall from the house. And Wright simply doesn't even bother drawing a version of the plan for it. He just directly proposes immediately a plan on top of the waterfall. And here, so there's the house itself becomes again almost like a manifesto, even if it's if it's not claimed as a manifesto, but it's so strong, its image that becomes also a manifesto. So not just for this embodiment of flows, but also for the visible principle, another visible principle which is very important in the work of Wright, with the one of what he calls the destruction of the box. So you see these cantilevers that somehow shift and break with the idea of the house as a container. And these are the schemes that he himself reports in this book, An American Architecture, and where you can see this destruction of the box at work. So here, roofs, and floors and windows are freed from their traditional function, and are so from their relation to containing or to boxing a function, and can stand here as free elements in themselves. They can establish a new use, freed from this dialectic container contained. So freed from this dialectic, so freed from this dual relationship, and therefore establishing space, something as a third dimension, is in the words here of Frank Lloyd Wright, something, a third dimension to play with. So, and glass is a third dimension where glass is still a constitutive element, especially glass. A third dimension that, again, doesn't mean a three-dimensional conception of space that's given, but a dimension that escapes the sheer rationality of, let's say, the Cartesian plane, that goes beyond this sheer rationality of calculation. Almost a transcendent dimension that goes beyond. And about transcendent dimensions, so about, let's say, something more, to come back to something more spiritual, here we see the project in 1905, 1908 of the Unity Temple by Frank Lloyd Wright. A Unitarian church, so a church which somehow is concerned, a cult which is concerned with the unity of all things, the unity which is also contained in the term Usonian, which is the term that Wright himself invents to to describe is a utopian, let's say, idea of the American civil society embodied in architecture. So a term that unites USA and Union, and which is a union, again, that is not a mere sum. So it's not a mere calculation, but it's something that exceeds the sum. So once again, a spirit. So something is, this is what architecture for Wright embodies. He says, ask the question, what is architecture? He says, it is life itself taking form. It is a great spirit. It is a spirit by man and for man, a spirit for time and place. And here to start, let's say, our conclusion, we come back to the beginning. This is again, toward an architecture, one of the first chapters. The figure of the temple, again, and the idea of spirit is something also common, I would say, with Le Corbusier. Here, there is a comparison, a direct comparison, very well known, between the Greek temples and machines, so the modern cars. And not to say that cars are better than temples, or that cars are better than old architecture, but that we don't have any temple for today. So we don't have that form on top. We don't have it for, let's say, today, so the time of Le Corbusier. So we must find an architecture that matches the one of the temple, but in the modern time, which is, again, so different from the car. So it's not an embodiment of engineering, but of something not yet, so but of a spirit, so this esprit nouveau. And there is indeed so despite the celebration of a way of engineering aesthetics by Le Corbusier, he claims, of course, a difference between architecture and engineering. He says that the engineer is inspired by the economy of law and governed by mathematical calculation, and therefore he puts us in accord with universal laws, and what he achieves is finally harmony. The architect instead realizes an order which is a pure creation of spirit. So what he achieves is beauty. So they work together, of course. It's not that one excludes the other, but they have two different domains. And this is, I think, it's even more beautifully summarized by one of the writings of Mies. So this is an article which you see is titled "Build Beautifully and Practically, Stop This Cold Functionality," where he says, it is fundamentally wrong to assume that the problem of the modern architecture has been recognized as soon as one admits the need for a rational solution. This belief today, taken as self-evident, is only a precondition. If one wants to produce beautiful objects or beautiful houses, one must first of all be able to produce them in the most economical, that is, the most practical way. This verity, as banal as it is today often heralded as the ultimate goal, whereas in reality is not an artistic nor a building aim, but simply a necessary precondition, a basis. So this functionalism is not the final end of architecture, but just the ground on which one should elevate itself. And he says, but what is this beauty? What is finally beauty? Certainly nothing that can be calculated or measured. It is always something imponderable, something that lies in between things. So, again, in between, something between numbers and calculations, so nothing that can be grasped with that, something, let's say, an irrational and uncountable third, something between sky and earth, something, let's say, close to a floor or an environment, something in between the subject who looks and the object who is looked at, so a kind of transparent device. This somehow to summarize our path so far. And this in-between, I think, is also what interesting to conclude Le Corbusier. So this in-between, which escapes calculation, and I think it's also somehow at the center of the proposal of the modulars, of this measuring system that Le Corbusier proposes around the 50s. So a measure that itself is put in some kind of in-between. First of all, the in-between of, so as a response, is a third measure which overcomes the difference, the dichotomy and the opposition between the imperial measuring system of feet and the metrical one, which Corbusier himself says is alien to the human body and therefore to architecture because it's based on a division of the planet and not anything, it's not related to the human body. So instead, instead we should come back to relate the measurement and the proportion to the man. You see, it's here pictured, the man by Le Corbusier, in a way, but that to achieve a measurement that can be suitable and can harmonize also man and machine. So again, an in-between between something, I would say, more circular and something more squared, so man and machine. And I think it's what is very important is just not just the idea of the reference to the man, but it's also what you see always next to it, so the spiral. Because, so of course, like Leonardo's Vitruvian Man, it starts from the human body of disproportion, but like Leonardo's, it unfolds this spiral between a circular dimension and a linear one. So the spiral is the figure in which the circle finds itself unfolded in a linear dimension, so where the two can stand together without being in opposition to each other. And this is also, I would say, this same tension between a linear dimension and the one and a recurrent one, so a circular one, is expressed in this scheme, summarizing in this scheme, of which Le Corbusier himself says, this is published in When the Cathedrals Were White. He says, if in the course of the mutation of machine civilization I have been able to contribute something, it will be design. So he leaves it as some kind of heritage of his work. And here again you see, so there's a tension between, or a communion between a recursive dimension, the one of the sun revolving around the earth of course this is not astrophysically correct, but to summarize it. And pointing out to a measure which is not simply a spatial dimension. You see it here, he says this sets the rhythm of work for man. This is the measure of our urban enterprises, but a rhythm. So a measure which is unfolded in time, and therefore able to grasp this difference between, is able therefore to grasp what is the yet to come, so the toward, this vanishing point. So, and it is also able to give form to give a line, to give form to a perpetual change, so to a perpetual revolution. So again, something that stands in between or puts together architecture and revolution. Thank you.
Riccardo, thank you very much for this interesting lecture. I wanted to ask you if there are still questions remaining. Please use the time.
Was that too long?
No question.
I can leave my mail, it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you end with the Mies quote about.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at both the Corbusier and also the expressionists, there's an incredible interest also in scientific aesthetics.
Yeah.
So the issue of Vogue that you show opens up with an essay on this scientific aesthetics. It's the same what of course the expressionists did.
Mm-hmm.
Colors also, for example, the gold section. So the relationship is, of course, is a bit more ambivalent. Of course, Mies van der Rohe has a very specific position. That is one thing. That's also maybe the modular, which of course presents in that period something almost humanist, you would say, which is of course during the war starts out as a process of rationalization and standardization of production.
Mm-hmm. So
at some point there, I wonder what the order is to show the images also of the Franklin Wright building can go way back to the hospitals that Rohe analyzes.
Yeah.
So sometimes you use examples that most of your examples are, let's say, canonized architecture, and sometimes it's not. And sometimes, so there seems to be, but I'm a bit wondering what is really the agenda that you use. Does not seem to be political. You would have, of course, used the political interpretation of the Corbusier, which kind of fits with the later initial design of the Urbanization, instead of houses. So the revolutionary things are certainly political.
Yeah. the agenda of this.
Of the way you read.
Yeah. So, first of all, to somehow answer to the last point, it's true, I didn't mention all the political dimension of Le Corbusier, which is very present, and that will open a full new chapter, but that was not really my interest, because indeed my agenda is less related, I would say, to the form of architecture. So architecture somehow, I'm looking into architecture as a rendering of it, but it's more linked to this investigation over the idea of an excluded third, so of something that goes beyond a dialectical understanding of things, and that I believe, and I think I'm finding here what I showed today, I hope, is somehow something which is grasped by these great masters. So it's not a case that they are masters because somehow they can understand that there's a problem there and they can access it. So it's concerning, for example, the idea of science, which is and of secular, let's say, of secular society. It's also concerning the difference, I would say, between what is legal and what is legitimate. So finding the legitimization, where does stand the legitimization of the modern? So where does the legitimization of science stand? So is it by self-legitimate, or does it create, does it have a kind of self-made principle which is hidden? And so try to relate to this topic. So it's still, I would say, it's an ongoing research. So this I made up, it was a tailored lecture for today.
You could ask what legitimizes the genius.
Yeah, definitely, yes. Which is, comes also.
So you come in a kind of matrushka.
But because, that's exactly what one of the points, because the genius or the author, I would say, has an interesting relation with the sovereign. So there's an interesting relation between sovereignty and authority, in the sense of casting itself off from things, so of an exclusion, so of an exception, creating an exception. But
Thank you, everybody, to be here. Next week, as I already announced, we have the evaluation. And thank you, Riccardo, for coming. See you next week, guys.